Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the ALS United Mid Atlantic Goals podcast. I'm Tony Heil with ALS United Mid Atlantic, and if you've listened to our podcast in the past, you know that we have had many different perspectives when it comes to ALS. That includes people living with ALS, people who are direct caregivers, people who've lost someone to ALS, people who are researchers, our care staff, social workers and nurses, clinicians, and even sometimes people outside of ALS who are part of the Cures Collective, including people working on Huntington's disease and Parkinson's disease, because together we are advancing science and working to encourage more investments in medical research, and that will help the ALS community as well as everyone else. Today I'm really excited to talk to my friend Nadia Sethi. She is with North Star ALS, and Nadia has her own ALS connection, and she has an extensive history and experience working to advance research and do everything she can to educate the ALS community and make others feel connected to research, because they are connected. Your stories matter, they make a difference. I met Nadia, I think, through her work with ALS TDI. She knows my friend John Russo, who many of you who listen, who are involved with us, know John Russo. He is super involved as a person living with ALS and as an advocate. She's also worked with Niels and with IMALS. She is in her final semester, as I understand, with a Master of Science in Clinical Pharmacogenomics and Precision Medicine with the University of Florida. She also has a Doctor of Dental Surgery degree and Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry from UCLA. So she takes her education in science very seriously, and she wants you to be involved. She wants to make sure that you, if you are connected to ALS, that you know that you can make a difference as well. So Nadia, with that introduction, thank you for talking with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Tony. I love it. I'm so excited to be here. And I want to say hi to John Russo because I have many favorite people, but he is one of them. So yeah, he's just amazing. And we go way back.
Yeah, I go way back with, I've been here for 15 years, and I think my first or second year here, I met John. He had recently been diagnosed, and I just saw him. He was just in Washington, D.C. last week. He does so much, and he does it as so many others do for others more than himself.
He does. He's incredible. He's done so much for ALS research and ALS awareness and just a really amazing human.
Great. Well, I'll send him that clip, and then he'll be nice to me. So that's important.
Perfect.
He's nice to almost everybody. And you're nice too, because you are really trying to empower people with ALS and others. So give us a little bit of background about your ALS story and your connection to this disease.
Yeah, so my husband was diagnosed with ALS in 2019. His first symptom, like he couldn't, pinch a binder clip or grasp like a piece of paper with between two fingers. And that was really it. And we lost him 20 months following that really small
I'm
first
sorry.
symptom. Thank you so much. And so, it was really difficult what happened in our home. And, it's ALS Awareness Month this month. And so it's been on my mind what we went through. I don't talk about our experience so often because it was really tough. And I see so many people who are going through many of the same things, and I'm definitely here to support them. But isn't the easiest thing to go back and, dwell on that part of our lives. But yeah, it was a lot. I remember every single day I was thinking that nobody should have to live like this. Nobody should have to die like this. This isn't something that I want anyone to go through. And, to me, the way to change that, there's so many things that ALS takes away from us. One of the ways we are empowered in ALS is to contribute to the research and to understand the research and to try to push for the research that's really going to impact our lives. And that's kind of the approach that I've taken over the last 7 years, is to try to bring attention to research in different ways, to try to make sure that, research that's going to have outcomes that are helpful to us, to our daily lives. We want that to advance.
And before then, did you have much awareness and understanding of ALS because you had some scientific background, or was it very new to you?
No, it was still really new, right? ALS. I know that for those of us in the community, it definitely doesn't seem rare. And I think once you're in the community, you really see it everywhere. One of the reasons it's so rare, we hear this often, is because we lose people so quickly in this disease. And the number of people who are diagnosed is equal to the number of people we lose annually. But no, I didn't know a lot about it. And I remember as a practicing dentist, I once had a patient who had ALS. I think about her very often now, and I'm pretty sure our conversations would be a lot different today than they were at the time, right? And I remember her leaving and, kind of going back and looking up what Lou Gehrig's disease was. And then lo and behold, 7 years later, it landed in my life in a very personal way, right? And so now I know a lot about ALS. But no, back then, you know, I think I think the world could stand to know a little bit more about ALS.
Yeah, and like you said, it's much more common than people realize. I was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania for advocacy and met with someone who works for my state senator. I'd never met him before, and he knew one of our families from that part of the state. So, like, it wasn't even like he was local to me, but he had an ALS connection. And this week I was at a conference in Philadelphia, and I had multiple people come up to me and say, "Oh, yeah, I had someone here. I knew this friend or this family member." And I'm always really surprised by how many people, and maybe it's because ALS is so powerful of a disease and it's so recognizable that it stands out in their memories.
Yes, it is a very unique disease, right? And yeah, and I've you kind of listed all my different education, but I've had the chance to think about disease in many different contexts, and ALS is up there in how difficult it is to go through, to manage, all of it.
And so, how did you become focused in the science and research of ALS?
Yeah. So to me, it was really about, let's figure out how we can fix this, right? And I know that's a huge feat. To me, there wasn't really a good place when I landed here for people to understand in lay language what research meant, what was out there. There wasn't even a great way to understand what research was recruiting or active. And to me, it also didn't matter as much what was happening only in the US. Like, I wanted to know what was happening everywhere. We have had a drug approved in ALS where the trial happened in Japan, right? We have edaravone where the trial that got that approved didn't happen here in the US. So it is relevant to us what's happening in other countries. And so when I started out, we met some folks at IMALS. We thought they were wonderful. And we ended up creating a little spreadsheet that had some drugs on it and some details about it. And I've kind of been obsessed ever since with the idea of what is happening around the world and how we can get people involved. So I've grown that into a social media platform on Facebook. It's been active for 7 years now. I think I started at the month my husband got his official diagnosis because I was like, how do we reach people like at a broad level? And I'm sorry, I know social media gets a bad rap, but we all do. We all go and we want to know what other people are, many of us do. We want to know what other people are doing. We want to hear it from other people who are living the same thing we are. Like, that is the age that we're in. And so I did look to social media in 2019, and that platform has grown to about 11,000 people, which really tells me that there's an interest in learning about what trials are recruiting, what research is out there, how do the regulatory processes work, what does this new research paper mean, all of those kinds of things.
Yeah, and I think that for people with ALS who are maybe feeling stuck at home, having a social media presence helps a lot. And you were starting this really at the start and the breadth of the pandemic, where you had more reason to stay at home. It was a huge risk for people with ALS. So, there's a ripe opportunity for people to find an outlet online.
Yes, absolutely. I think I remember when we were going through ALS, like there weren't even virtual support groups and things like that, which kind of blew my mind. And then because of COVID, now there's a lot of virtual support for ALS. But yeah, it was kind of that ripe time for, more people were online. And in ALS, yes, it is easy for people to communicate through online, venues and social media. And so we are seeing more of that, which I think is great. I think it's good to draw as much attention as we can.
And because people can be online, there's a lot of great information and a lot of misinformation, whether intentional or not. There's a lot of confusion. When you have ALS or it's in your family, it's usually the first time you've really been tackling that as a person. So I see that you really try to present that in an approachable way online, but you have talked about making sure people get the right information. How do you help to clarify that?
Yeah, I think it's tough. And when I started out for the first several years, I really would just reshare information rather than kind of try to interpret it in any way. Because even as a healthcare professional, even with a background in biochemistry, to understand research in neurodegenerative disease is a whole different ballgame. And so I was also you can see my personal evolution, I think, if you go back and look at old content on the Facebook group. But now I do know a little bit more about, research, what makes, a good study. I'm saying good with a grain of salt, but what makes a study that's going to give us results that will impact the future of research. That's really what we want, right? We want research that we can build upon. And so that's kind of my focus now. I think the other thing is that a lot of the headlines we see from press releases and news articles and things like that. And when you're living with the disease, hope means a lot to us. I used to say that we're living on hope, and we were. But it's also, hope is a tricky thing. And so I think I've now shifted that to having hope in science and hope in reality, because I also got a rude awakening when my husband passed, right? And I saw all of the hope burst, and I saw it hope burst very rapidly. And so, I think my goal is to present information where people can get a more realistic view of what does this headline mean for me? What does this very exciting sounding super early stage research mean for me? I mean, we see like headlines coming from research where there's not even a drug yet, but it sounds amazing, right? And so that's good. And there's this whole idea of a drug pipeline that starts in the laboratory and is still going, right? We have lots of things that need to happen in a lab before the drug goes to human trials. And then even after a drug is approved, we continue to study it. And that whole pipeline is what we kind of need to look at. We shouldn't really focus on one specific treatment only, because it's probably going to take more than one cure. This is a very long-winded answer to your question.
That's really important because, like you said, there's probably not just one cure. We have now tofersen that it looks very promising for people of a certain genetic disposition to ALS, but that's only a small percentage. So that's a good thing. Any advancement's great, but that doesn't necessarily help people like my grandfather when he had ALS. And we have no reason to think that we had that genetic connection in our family. So, someone else may feel like, well, that's great for them, but what about me? How do you navigate those conversations where, we have to look at many different paths?
Yeah, and I think that's where, the new educational background I have in precision medicine has been really key. I've gotten the chance to learn about other diseases and the genetics that come into play in the therapeutics in those diseases. And I've learned it all from the lens of ALS. So I've been doing this for the last 4 years, one class at a time, and really thinking about all of those things through the lens of ALS. So yes, tofersen is approved, to help for people with SOD1 ALS, but it really has already opened doors for others. And I'm really passionate about this. So I think at North Star this summer, we're planning an initiative called Illuminate Precision Medicine, where we're going to talk about precision medicine, in the context of SOD1. What did it take to get tofersen approved? How was it developed? Because that is the model that will help the rest of us. And it's already doing that. We've got a lot of rare genetics in ALS, and we're going to need to tackle those one by one. And then for sporadic ALS, we also are probably going to need to start figuring out what makes groups different from each other within sporadic ALS. So they may have a lesser genetic component, right, where it's not one gene driving the whole disease, but they may have multiple genes that are impacting the disease, or they may have genes that are protective, that are allowing them to progress more slowly. And so we've got to start kind of unraveling those genetics. We need to also start looking for other types of markers. There may be things in people's blood or their spinal fluid that says, hey, this person will be matched better to this type of drug. And once we see drug development, I think, going in that direction, I think we're going to stand a better chance than trying to just throw one drug at everyone. So, yeah, so I mean, I am really passionate about this precision medicine approach. And yeah, tofersen has really done so much for us. And I really honor the families with SOD1 ALS who have gone through so much and contributed to research in so many ways. I mean, they are the ones who have made this possible. We see researchers saying, "Hey, we've been working on this," and we see pharma companies saying, "We're the ones who made this happen." But at the heart of it, it's really the families who contributed tissue samples and blood and time and energy and their lives, honestly, to make that treatment come to fruition.
Yeah, if you are listening to this podcast, one of our episodes from last year was with my friend Rochelle Green from New Jersey. She was in those trials on for tofersen. She explains her process of being on it, and her feelings on the benefits for herself and her family's genetic connection. And one thing that reminds me of as you're talking, Nadia, is I was at a bio industry event a year or so ago, a little over a year ago, and they were talking about how to help with research and science in Philadelphia or Pennsylvania. And I said, well, what are you doing for accessibility? And the speakers, very nice, very compassionate people, were like, what? And like, well, the research doesn't matter if the patients can't get in the building. Like that's like sometimes it's the most basic thing. What kind of education would you have for policymakers and for researchers and drug companies about getting patients involved? Because sometimes it's the basics.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's why I love this question. I think that's why it's so important that all of those parties are really talking to ALS families. And I would love it if for a minute they kind of tried to make their mind go blank and, to stop coming from their perspective and to understand for a minute what it's like for these families on a daily basis. What are they going through, right? So for anyone who's in policy, I'd want them to put policy forward that will that will allow for therapeutics that are making a meaningful change. And I have a complicated relationship with this word meaningful. But is it actually impacting our daily lives? Is it making things a little easier for the person who's living with ALS, for the family, for the caregiver? That's what we want. We want to see those types of changes. And it's the same thing for researchers. I think I've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years talking about and thinking about like even early stage lab research and whether researchers at that stage should really be interacting with people living with ALS and caregivers. And I think they should. I think they should have, if they're creating a biomarker, if they're in like even before they have a drug, they should be thinking about, is this drug going to slow function? What is it actually going to do for this person? Like, is it going to slow function enough to impact their daily lives in a meaningful way? And that doesn't happen until you interact with the family.
Right, because we're not doing this to end ALS. We're doing this to help human beings, and they have ALS. Like, ending ALS is good for that goal of the human reason. We have a great lab at Penn State Health Hershey Medical Center. Dr. Zarnescu, who's had a podcast here, she's doing a lab visit with the open house, and she wants those people to see what they're doing. They like who they're helping. She wants people affected by ALS to see this, and for the people she's working with to see them. They come to the walks, etc. And I see that around the country. Like, obviously, we care here, but that makes a big difference, that relationship between people with ALS or impacted by it and the scientific community. Like you
Yes.
said, you have to come together.
Absolutely. I think it's two-way engagement, right? It's, ALS families we are so interested in the research and learning what researchers are doing. And, we want laws and policy that advance therapeutics for us. So I think on the other side of that, yeah, it would help if there was a little bit of listening and looking and understanding the problem that they're trying to solve with those things.
Yeah. So tell me about North Star ALS because we need to explain what you're doing there.
Yeah, so for North Star, I think I spent so many years, 6 years, trying to, find different ways to connect people with research. And I was still seeing really major gaps. And I was still hearing from people, I didn't get any information about trials. I don't know where to look. I don't know where to start. And I also have learned that we can put a lot of information out into the world, but for that information to connect with an ALS family and to connect in a way that's actionable is a whole extra layer of stuff that needs to be addressed. And so that's really where North Star comes in. We exist to connect ALS families with research in all different ways, whether that's, prioritizing whether you want to participate in it and then finding ways to access it, or whether it's sharing insights with researchers and policymakers, just like we're talking about. And it's really, listening to them and being here for them. And so we're finding creative ways at North Star to get that information out to people, like in a bite-sized way every day, and also through webinars that are more hands-on where people can come and we've built a model around how to approach research, for example. Now, what are the things you should be thinking about? What do you do? How do you talk to your doctor? What if your clinic doesn't have options? How do you look beyond that? It's okay to not participate if it's not the right fit for you. What is informed consent? All of those things. We've kind of built, easier ways to understand these things so we can help walk people through the process.
I think that's really helpful because a lot of people they like research. I put that in there, but you don't know what that all means. And like you said about informed consent, it's okay to have your own boundaries and your own limits, and to talk about that so that the person you're participating in science with can respect you as a human being.
Yes, absolutely, right. I think patient autonomy is such an important thing. And this is the second time I'm having this conversation today. This disease takes a lot from us because it matters to me. This disease takes a lot from us. And I feel like a lot of us have guilt if we're not doing everything possible to try to, if we're not taking enough drugs, we're not trying enough supplements and all of those things. And there's a cost to that too, right? It takes our time, it takes our very precious time, it takes our energy, it takes resources to do that. And so let's try to lift some of that guilt. Let's give people the pathways to think about these things and talk about these things. Like my hope is to also give people some of their time back so that they don't have to spin their head in circles trying to figure this stuff out.
Yeah, well, maybe there's more opportunity for collaboration then. That's we love our new name. Well, it's not too new anymore, but ALS United Mid Atlantic. We really focus on the ALS, but also the United part. And I think that there's ways. I know you've talked with other people in our network, I talked with Sherry from ALS Network about your work. She's spoken very highly of you, and so I think there's more ways that we can collaborate to better educate our ALS families locally.
I love it. And can we get John Russo involved?
He has to be really nice to me though, so we'll see. But he I will definitely get him involved, and he's involved in so many ways with us. And but I love that for us, and I know for you, it's about patient involvement and empowerment. It's not about talking down and saying, "Here's what we're doing." It's a communication of what do you want us, what's important to you, instead of here's what's important to me.
Yeah, and I really like what you're saying, Tony. And I think the most effective collaborations are the ones that help, all of the sides, right? And so, yeah, we would be very glad to work with you. And our North Star is, the families at home who are going through this disease. Yeah, and you're nodding, and I know that that's your North Star too. And so, yeah, how do we find ways to get this information out to people? What can we do together more effectively? I'm all in for that.
Because if you're talking about research and being patient forward and person forward, it's you could be really excited as a scientist that we made it so that you can operate a fax machine, just or like we made it so that you can do this one task, and you present that to people living with ALS or their spouses or kids or families, and they'll say, well, but that's not what I wanted. This is what I want. I want to be able to get to my son's soccer game or my daughter's college graduation. Like, what does this do for me?
Right. And I think those are the conversations that we should be having. And, back to Topherson, like we're seeing what's possible now. And, it's not a spectacular overnight change, right? And so realistically, what can we do? What are our drugs going to look like, even when they're targeting the main underlying biology of a specific type of ALS? So I think we're also in that time where we should all be learning from that and understanding. And so, in the context of that, what is a meaningful change? Yeah, that's exactly it. Because there's a lot of things we can want and wish and hope for, but what's realistically possible with a drug in different stages of ALS? I think that's one of the conversations we should be having.
And those are sometimes very frustrating conversations because if you've been living with ALS for 4, 5, 6, 7 years, you may be at a stage where the drugs, as we have now, can't reverse that. And that's what we would love to have, but that might be a much harder thing to get done than being early in a diagnosis and stopping that progression.
Yeah, and it may take a combination, right? We may
Hmm.
need to layer on drugs, that are slowing things down, and then other drugs that are, helping the body regenerate faster. And so, but those are the conversations that we should be having. And they are two-way conversations that really should include the families who are facing this at home, because no, we're the stakeholders that really care about the end result. Our time is limited and precious, and we don't want to waste it taking drugs that are not making important changes for us.
Yeah. Now, talking about targeting research, that goes back to what you're saying about precision medicine. I've heard about that for years, and it's a growing discipline in terms of science anywhere. Can you explain a little bit about what people should know about the term precision medicine and what that can mean for ALS?
Yeah, precision medicine, I think it's not a very well-defined term across the board because it's so new. I like to share in the last 4 years, a lot of my learnings were from research papers. They weren't from textbooks and things like that because we didn't even have like a full genome sequenced until
Mhm.
relatively recently. And so this is, I think, a huge path, not only for ALS, but where this is where medicine is going. And if we can start identifying what is happening in someone's genetics that makes them susceptible, or are mutations that are causative for a disease, what are risk factors, those are the things that are really going to start impacting diseases in different ways. But precision medicine is really finding ways to get the right drug to the right person at the right time. At a simple level, that's what it is. And so we need massive amounts of data to do this. We have so many natural history studies in ALS today, which is awesome. And I've seen that growth myself in the last 7 years. Things have changed a lot. Tofersen has changed a lot of things. But also we've got big databases around the world that are happening now in outside of ALS too, where they're just, collecting data from the general population. And we're going to learn from that in ALS and beyond as well, right? Because then they can track people over time and see who is developing ALS. So there's probably ways to leverage genetics beyond just, and we talked about this a lot today, but how do we leverage genetics beyond those people who carry a single causative mutation? So we're heading in that direction, and that's precision medicine.
Yeah, I think it's really positive. It's really challenging because then you're looking at everybody individually. So it's not just you have a headache, take an Advil or a Tylenol. It's unique, but I think that there's so much potential. And how are you feeling about that hope? We talked about that, about how hope can rise and also can feel destroyed at times. You can have a difficult relationship with hope. How are you feeling about the positivity and progress in ALS research today?
Yeah, I mean, truly, I've seen things evolve a lot in the last 7 years. Like, there's been so many great things. We have platform trials, we have potential biomarkers, we keep going back to tofersen, but we have, tofersen is a great proof of concept for all of us, right? And so there has been a lot of progress. We have AI, which I think, it's entering a lot of our lives in many different ways. I don't know if AI is going to give us the answers like a magic wand that we would love to have, but it can process huge amounts of information really, really quickly. And so now that we're starting to have these really massive data sets, I think that there is a lot of potential in our future. And I think, from the ALS family side, from people who are living with this disease, from the caregivers, If we can educate ourselves on the science and how this all works, then we can advocate for better drugs. We can advocate, we want access to the drugs that are going to have the better science. So how do we push for better science so that we can get those better drugs? That's kind of where my hope lies, is pushing towards those therapeutics that'll make a difference for us. And actually, this also reminds me, you're saying like we're going to have to create new pathways to treat these smaller populations. And we're also seeing some changes, at a regulatory level, like the FDA brought up the plausible mechanism pathway, in recent months. And so I don't know if that's the ideal solution for everything, but it's a start, right? We're starting to have those conversations about how do we develop drugs for really small groups, and how do we approve those drugs for small populations. Like that, we're starting to see that shift, I think, across the board.
Yeah, and I think one of the things to educate people on is about that approval process and why it's there. Because a lot of us, very understandably, we don't have patience when it comes to approving a drug. And you talk about 5 years, maybe longer for a therapy, and there's a lot of people who pass away as a result. But have you educated people about the need for not just fast approval, but approval of good drugs? Because we want to latch on to what sounds great, and then maybe it really wasn't that helpful for X, Y, and Z drug.
Yeah, I think this is such an important conversation, right? And I feel like there's a lot of nuance to both sides, right? Where some people are like, no, we should have a very clear sign that a drug is having a meaningful benefit in somebody, that like they're now able to do something they couldn't do. And that's when we should get it approved. And then you'll have other people who will say, no, we should be very lenient with our approvals because it'll attract more research and scientists and industry to develop drugs for ALS. Somewhere in the middle of that is probably like the right balance. And I don't get to determine who that is. That really should be a conversation across the board that we're all having, and that we should be thinking about, the impact of this. A couple of years ago, we had a drug come off of the market for ALS, and I do spend a lot of time on social media, and there was a couple of weeks there where people were really devastated, right? And it does kind of destroy trust to some degree, where people have faith that when a drug is approved that it's doing something. And when we lose that, it's also a painful process. And one of the very sad things in ALS is that we do lose people all the time. And so the community kind of has a short memory sometimes on how this all works. But it was a pretty hard time in the community when that drug came off the market and people were stopping to take it. I remember talking with one person who was like, well, Nadia, I got 30 minutes of my day back because the drug didn't taste very good. And, they had to chase it with something else. And then, they had to distract themselves and they had to mix it. And so that 30 minutes of time that person got back was important to them. And it would have been important to me when we were going through ALS. Every minute mattered. And so I do think that we need more discussions at a broad level about these things.
I have a neighbor who was on a drug for a whole different thing, nothing ALS related. And he ended up having some very terrible vision and mobility problems. And I don't know if it's exactly related. I don't want to get involved in a lawsuit. It just shows that we are all eager for treatments for anything. But when it comes to science, there's always a potential for drawbacks and risk. And that was a drawback and a risk that he had not anticipated because it was totally unrelated to the therapy he was using. But learned that, yeah, this is a possibility, but a small percentage could have that problem. And that's a big risk and gamble we have to take when it comes to science.
Absolutely. I think, with drugs, it's always, does the risk outweigh or does the benefit outweigh the risk, right? And so when it does, then it's worth it. I think we hear a lot in ALS that, we'd be willing to do anything. And, we made silly mistakes in our house too. Like my husband started taking a bunch of supplements and his liver enzymes were going crazy. And then we had to stop all. And like, we're not coming at this, we worked in healthcare, both of us. And so I think there is still that vulnerability and that desperation to try things, right? But we have to think about what is the impact of that drug. And yeah, there can be side effects, there can be difficult things. And hey, if the drug has, strong benefits and, some side effects that are difficult, then yeah, we'll deal with the side effects. But like, let's have a drug that really does help in some way if we're going to tolerate those other things. Like, we need to think about in that direction. I always tell people that when we're in a clinical trial, we don't know if the drug is going to help, harm, or do nothing. And those are all possibilities. They're all real possibilities.
Right. And I've learned from talking with our researchers that the difference between an animal model or an idea versus a human is massive. There's only so much you can learn from a mouse. And they put mice on little tiny treadmills, which is adorable. But so like there's only so much you can learn from that. Whereas for a person, a drug can not work at all. It can do a whole different thing. If you're talking about what it does for speech, life isn't Ratatouille. You can't ask the mouse to communicate. You have to see how it works for a person. So the challenges are very real, and the risk and reward may not be as clear as you might think from the basic early data.
Yeah, I think you said it really well. Yeah, that's exactly it, right? We need those models. I remember talking with a researcher once, and she was like, I was, grilling her on mouse models, and she was like, Nadia, it's just a model. and
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh yeah, you're right. And it is like we need to figure out, this is a really awful puzzle. And the scientists are trying to get clues how they can, and we need those models, but we also have to understand the limitations of those models. Exactly.
Well, wonderful. Now, as we finish here now, I hope that we can continue to collaborate. I'm really excited about the way you put things into understandable way of talking about research, and you respect people's dialogue on it. So just not trying to get into an argument, just getting the information out there. But how can we get information out about North Star? What's the website and what should people know?
Yeah, people can visit us at northstarals.org. In addition, we're trying to make research really digestible, so you can also find us on Instagram and Facebook as North Star ALS. On Instagram, we're northstarals.org, and we share information, anywhere from 3 times a week to every single day. We try to share some bite-sized information about ALS research to help everybody learn. I mean, this is how a smarter community can do a lot of. I was going to say a smarter community can do a lot of damage, good damage. We can do effective advocacy. We can push for the drugs that we think are better if we understand these regulatory processes, these trials, all of this research.
Sometimes doing damage is a good thing. Sometimes to break things in order to make things. So that's okay. And lastly, Nadia, I like to ask this for people who are so invested in ALS because it's such a serious topic. And I think we need to get a break sometimes. I talked with my friend Gently, who does rock climbing. Do you do things that aren't ALS focused? Are they like, is it reading, movies, backgammon? How do you separate and enjoy just the decompression of life?
I think that's such an important question. And I will say in the last 7 years, I have lost a lot of those things that I used to do before ALS. Like a lot of things have lost their meaning. The one way that I get, I don't know, that I get some perspective about the universe, I go stare at the ocean for a little bit. It was something we couldn't do when ALS was in our house. It was really hard to even leave the house. And so I go to the beach a lot. I sit there and I stare at the ocean because I'm up at 2 a.m. looking up ALS research a lot of times and things like that. So that is the one thing that really brings me some peace and perspective, like that there's a bigger world out there than us.
There is never any shame in staring at the ocean. If it was near me, I would do it too. So thank you, Nadia. I really appreciate you giving so much of your time today and all the time you're giving to ALS research and ALS patients and families. Again, if you can learn about their work at northstarals.org, you can follow us on social media at ALS Mid-Atlantic or follow our website, www.alsmidatlantic.org. We'll share more information in the description here. Nadia, I know we're going to continue to collaborate and we're going to find these answers together.
Looking forward to it, Tony. I really appreciate ALS United and all that you're doing.
Thank you so much. And please follow and share and send me your information about what you would like to see on this podcast and videos as we educate the ALS community and empower them to work towards a world without ALS.